Good morning.
Good
Morning.
How you
morning.
folks doing?
I'm doing really good, I think.
That's a good Friday stream.
Yeah.
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 All
I'm
right.
excited for this because I'm coming in, I think, as a person who maybe knows the absolute least about this.
It's okay.
So,
I'm feeling the same way, Pilot.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I've done some research on the tools we'll talk about today, and I've played with them, but I don't really know that much about them either. So like, I'm definitely not an expert at like AI stuff and LLM stuff at all, but um but I thought it would be kind of an interesting thing to talk about because we have had people ask about running large language model type things on Reclaim Cloud, if it was possible, how that would work, all that kind of stuff. What are the implications? And so basically, I found a tool that we'll look at today that actually makes it quite simple to, I mean, in the whole scheme of things, I think quite simple to get started with. And it also does a pretty good job of like demonstrating some of the limitations of running these tools on a cloud platform that is like ours, and we'll talk about why that is and all that stuff. In fact, I think I may ask it some questions about it, see how well it does. Um, but I also just thought it would be interesting to kind of use the time to explore sort of where we're at with some of these tools. I mean, I would say I can pretty confidently say as a company, we're not really employing any of them, any large language model type stuff really at all. Um, but I know as individuals, we may be using them in different capacities and things like that. But
I
there'll
mean, not
be,
unless I've seriously missed something, yeah.
yeah, we're definitely not as a company. It doesn't really make any sense for us. So,
No.
but yeah, so that's kind of where I'm thinking we'll go today. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
So what I want to do, kind of as always, is I want to kick off with creating an environment in Reclaim Cloud and everything, and
Hmm.
then while we're waiting for that to install, we'll kind of chat. So I'm gonna pull up my screen really quick, and just to do some table setting here. What we're gonna be using is a tool called Open WebUI, which is it's basically a web application that is open source that lets you run a lot of open source large language models inside of it in a kind of nice, relatively friendly interface. So you can think of this kind of like a content management system for AI models, sort of. Whereas it is itself not the AI models, but it gives you a nice web interface for them, basically. So we're going to run that, and we'll load up some models, and that will all run on the cloud. And it's kind of an interesting thing. Um, and we're of course going to do this on Reclaim Cloud. So in case someone stumbles upon this and doesn't know, we are Reclaim Hosting. We're a web hosting company, and we have a cloud platform called Reclaim Cloud, which is a containerized platform that you can run lots of different things on. We're really specialized in websites, web hosting in general. But we do a lot of work with schools, and Reclaim Cloud is our containerized cloud platform. So that's what we're going to use today. Um, so to do this, if I go to the Open Web UI's GitHub page, they have some information. Some of it's well documented, some of it they're still working on. But basically, I was taking a look through this of what the features were, that kind of stuff. There's a lot on their feature list. And then they had a quick start with Docker thing. So me seeing this, I was like, cool, quick start with Docker. We probably can run this on Reclaim Cloud. So um, they have some basically some like individual commands that would be designed for if you're running this on your local computer. But I know just from working with Docker stuff a lot that it's typically easier if you're going to do this on a cloud platform to use a compose file because you don't have to remember these long command strings. You basically get a file and you can define settings in that file.
Hmm.
And so I looked here and I noticed, oh, look, they do have actually a handful of Docker Compose files. They've got one here. They have one that says GPU, data, API, AMD GPU. So probably different configurations. I'm not really sure about the data one. But I basically just went and tried to use this normal one, and it worked great. So that's what we're going to do today too.
So you're
Um,
thinking, like, the other compose files would be if you wanted to make sure it got set up in a way that specializes for something?
yes. So one of the things we'll definitely run into and talk about is large language models as a technology. A
Mhm.
lot of machine learning stuff, AI stuff, large language models want to have a graphics processor, a GPU, available to it so that it can run quickly. We'll
Yeah.
talk about kind of why that is, although I'm far from an expert, but I can kind of explain my understanding. And that is to say, we don't have that in our cloud. Our Reclaim cloud is not really designed for that type of compute.
Mhm.
It is so only certain models will work well in our environment. So basically, these are different compose files for if you're going to run this on a computer that had like a big GPU attached to it. Like even for instance, like even like a gaming PC. Like I have one below my desk. I actually haven't tried it on here, but like that theoretically would run some of these things better. It would make my room literally warm while I asked questions, probably, but you know, like it would work. Um, and that's where we get into like the expense of running these things is because they run well or best on GPUs, and that type of compute is typically pretty expensive.
Yeah, resource
Um,
heavy.
yeah. So, all right. So what we need is a Docker environment. So I'm going to go back to Reclaim Cloud. I'm going to hit the Marketplace button, and I'll just type in Docker, and we'll hit Docker Engine CE and install. And I'll give this a name. We'll call it Open LLMs, maybe.
I'm just
Um,
go ahead, finish the thing that you're doing then.
and we'll give it a display name, and sure, let's run it in Canada. So this will take a few minutes, but basically this is going to make an environment with Docker pre-installed for us, ready to go. So
Mhm.
um, we'll wait for that. That'll take probably 2 or 3 minutes to deploy. And while we wait for that, yeah, I interrupted you, Pilot. What were you going to
Well,
say?
I interrupted you first. So, mostly I was just going to say that I was checking the chat. Sorry, chat. The my keyboard died literally 30 seconds before we hit go, so I can't respond to much. But we do have a comment in the chat. Tom says, "Is this the cPanel of AI? Would you call it?"
Maybe. I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the right metaphor, right? Because cPanel is a web UI that's managing other services on the server, basically, right? cPanel itself isn't hosting your website or serving your website. The Apache web server is, and PHP, the programming language, is used, and the database server. And cPanel lets you manage all of those things. So yeah, this is kind of that. Um, the difference being, I think, um, I'm actually, you know what? One thing we'll probably end up looking at if we have time is I don't actually know a lot about who makes this tool. I haven't gotten that far with it. Basically, I noticed, hey, it has a GitHub. It seems to have a lot of, it seems to be really popular on GitHub. And it's relatively easy to use and polished. So is there a company behind this one? I actually don't know. So maybe we should look at that. But I can tell you that this tool is, at least in the way we're using it, free and open source. Where cPanel is actually proprietary, but um, it of course manages open source tools. So
One question I had is like if we could go over the use cases for this. I think that kind of be a good like base. Well, it's already installed. That was
well,
super quick.
yeah, no worries. We'll definitely have time to chat through that too. I just wanted to mention that the environment is ready here. But yeah, as far as use cases, and I think Pilot is fixing their keyboard situation, so they'll be back. Um, but
Nope, I was fixing my mouse. Today's a great morning for me tech wise.
computers,
Yay!
they're sometimes they work. Um, so yeah, what is the use case? So, and I've been throwing around the word large language model, but yeah, what we're talking about is, systems that you can ask questions to and they will spit text back out at you. So like ChatGPT is one. The Microsoft's what is it called? What is Microsoft's thing called? It was built into Bing, but now it's called Copilot, I think. Yeah, Copilot.
I love that
S-
name. It's so good.
yeah, I bet you like that.
I'm only like 65% sarcastic. It's always just very confusing to me to see that pop up in the corner of my screen. It's like, do you want to use Copilot? I'm like,
There are also like 90,000 products already called Copilot. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of wild. Like if you now that Microsoft's got one called Copilot, like it's the thing,
Mhm.
right? But before that, if you Googled Copilot, man, you'd run into a million different little things. But yeah, so what we're talking about is things kind of like ChatGPT. So we're not going to do a whole thing of ChatGPT, but I do want to bring up this interface because when we show the Open WebUI interface, it will not be a mystery as to how they designed this thing. So, all right. So if I go back to Open WebUI's GitHub here, I'm going to grab the URL for the repository and just copy that. I'm going to go into. I'm not really referencing instructions, by the way, because they don't really document this particular way that we're going to do it. So it's not too many steps, but I basically came upon this based on other documentation I read, but nothing directly will be like, here's how you use Docker Compose. This is how we're going to do it and how I would recommend doing it, though. So what we're going to do here is, I forgot one other step. We're also going to set this up actually to be, we're not going to map a domain to this. We could, and in that case, I would want a public IP, but in my case, I don't actually need to map a domain. This is going to be a temporary thing. So I'm actually going to turn that off and save myself $3 a month, basically. I'm also going to give this a lot of computing resources. It's going to use about as much as we'll give it. So I'm going to give it 64 cloudlets. It's not going to use all of it all the time, but when we ask questions, it will use just about everything you give it. And then finally, I'm going to turn on SSL, just so we have a nice HTTPS cert. And I'm sorry, but I totally, before the stream, let my dog outside and forgot to leave her back inside. So I will be back in like just a hot second. So I maybe while I'm gone for 1 minute,
Meredith and I can vamp.
Pilot and Meredith, if you want to vamp, maybe talk about if you've used any of these types of tools before and what you use them for. So
Totally.
Yeah. So I guess the long and short of it is that I mostly haven't used AI tools before, in part because everybody else seems to have so many thoughts and opinions that I end up getting almost overwhelmed on where to start. So maybe this stream is going to be a good primer for me in terms of just what all is available.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had a chance to like explore a whole lot of the open tools, but used ChatGPT a couple times, and then I definitely want to see about using like the open frameworks versus like the Microsoft's or ChatGPT alternatives in that aspect.
I was going to ask, you use Grammarly, right? I keep getting ads for Grammarly that are like, and we have AI features now.
Yeah, I do. So the two that kind of stuck out to me were ChatGPT. I do use that like when I'm writing support tickets and stuff, but I don't use the AI like auto
generate stuff.
Auto generate. It's mainly just to spell check because I type too fast for my brain and my fingers get all like jumbled up and everything.
totally.
So and Elementor also has an AI tool for their website stuff. So I haven't used that either.
That, actually.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool for their text generation.
I can't imagine what that would you need in terms of resource usage.
Well, it runs on their cloud.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I should say, I think Elementor has a couple things. I noticed that they have text generation for copy, which I don't, whatever. Like, like if I can't write the copy of my website, then maybe I shouldn't make the website. But, maybe for like a proof of concept or something, I could see that. But I think they also have some AI like layout type things where you can say like, I want something that looks like this. That could be kind of interesting. Like I could see that being kind of cool, but I haven't played with that myself. And I'll say from my perspective, I I've played with ChatGPT a little bit, but I haven't done much with ChatGPT. I kind of immediately went um, into like the alternatives because I find ChatGPT not very useful for a lot of the things that it was initially hyped about. People are like, oh, you can ask it questions and it knows lots of answers to questions. And the nature of something like ChatGPT is that it hallucinates or comes up with wrong but plausible sounding information often enough for me that I don't find it very useful for like general knowledge questions. But I have found it useful for programming. So I'm not much of a programmer, but I understand the building blocks, right? I understand like what a function is in most language and what it should look like, and conditional statement, things like that. Just very, very, very base level stuff. And so I found it useful to do things in languages I'm not familiar with, or maybe I just need a kickstarting on. So I've done things like I had it help me make a little like one pager homepage that I have where it has like a little text editor. Actually, like it's been something I've been using for a little while. So I used it to help me make this. This is my new tab page in Firefox. And basically, it's just a little text editor. It has the time in the corner and it has a little weather widget. I wanted to learn how to do the weather widget, and I did most of that myself. But I asked it like, how would I put a clock here? And it kind of spit out some code that I could work with and modify to make it work. And I asked, how would I put a little text editor here with line numbers? And it had some suggestions for libraries to use that I had not come across. So I found it really useful for programming, but I don't program a lot, so I'm probably a close to perfect demographic for that, and it's not something I do even every week, um, and yeah. So that's kind of, and when I do that, I actually will use usually the search engine I use, Kaggy, has some AI features built into it, so you can put a question in here like, I don't know, a JavaScript function that returns the current date. And if I hit this little assistant button, it'll flip over to their thing. And this is, I think, using a few different models that they have available. It's one of them being OpenAI's ChatGPT stuff. But that's what I use when I do use it. But I don't have a ton. I haven't like pushed the limits of these things very much. Yeah.
Up and running?
Sorry, what?
We're up and running?
Well, we're almost up and running. So we have a Docker environment, and my dog is inside now. So those two requirements are met.
Okay. Check them off the list. Okay.
Yep. So I'm going to actually clone the GitHub repository for the Open WebUI. So I copied the URL. I'm going to type git clone, and then I'm going to paste that URL in. And basically, it just downloaded the whole folder for me. It made it in a folder called Open WebUI. So we're going to CD into there. And then in here, yeah, should be an exact copy of what we were looking at on the GitHub before. One of the files is dockercompose.yaml. Interestingly, that it's actually .y8ml. Usually people leave out the A in YAML, but whatever, that doesn't matter. But and we are going to change one thing in there. So I'm going to go in there in a text editor, and I am actually going to go in and change the port that it runs on. So by default, they've got this set up so that it would work even if you're running it on your local computer. So it runs on a weird port. It runs on port 3000. We don't really have that restriction because we're running on the cloud, and I want it to have like a nice SSL cert and run without a port number. So all I really need to do is just go to this port section and delete all this garbage in the front here, and then put an 80, which is the normal HTTP web port. And I can save the file. And basically, because I checked this box in the environment topology, it's going to automatically proxy that to HTTPS and issue a cert and all that kind of stuff. Because and especially because we haven't mapped a domain. So I've made that change. I'm currently looking in my notes here to see if there's anything else we specifically need to do. Oh, I am also going to install HTOP, which is a like system monitoring tool. I mean, I think the two of you have used it, but for folks watching who don't know, this is kind of like Task Manager, but for your Linux server. And I'm going to install that because it'll be interesting to see the resource usage of these tools. And this gives us a really nice way to look at that, basically. So it lays out all the processes. It's got a little list for each core. In this case, we have 10 virtual cores or 9 virtual cores to work with.
Are you able to highlight the text in there?
In here?
With up at the top where it says like 1, 2, 3, it's showing off the cores.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mostly asked just because it's real low contrast for me, which isn't something that you can necessarily do anything about, right?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it'll get high contrast when stuff is running.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yep. Nope, never mind. That'll do it.
But yeah, it is like the gray number is very hard to see against the black background. But there are bars that will pull up, so
right, that's fine
it'll
then.
be all right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to run our Docker command to fire it up. So I'm in the right folder already. I'm in Open WebUI. So I'm going to run docker compose up-d. And it's going to pull down all the information, all the containers it needs, and start running the application, which will, it'll take it, I don't know, a minute or so the first time. And I just realized I forget it actually has a timer on the right. So we'll see exactly how long it takes. This is kind of going to be interesting. Like I said, we'll use HTOP here because I have been specifically interested. There's lots of writing, and I think good writing and good questions being asked about like the energy usage implications of large language models. And it's an important question to ask, but it's a very complicated and nuanced one because there's a lot of different places where you may be talking about when you say large language models use a lot of energy. One of the things that we talk about the most is actually when they say to train a model, it takes months of time, these big models that we're using, and months of time and tons of energy. And we're not going to be training a model today. We're going to be using models that exist already, that have already been trained. So that is not really a factor for what we're doing today, but it is an important thing to talk about. And I wanted to make that distinction between when you hear about OpenAI saying it took a year to train this model, that's a thing they have to do one time to make that particular model, GPT-4 or whatever. But then there's also energy resources used and a cost associated with asking a question of the model, right? And we'll see that today. And it's kind of interesting when you run it on a cloud platform because you can directly see, in our case, like the CPU usage. It typically questions get answered in such a time as to the cloudlet usage over here will sometimes reflect this number gets updated, I believe, every few minutes. It's not like every second. Mm-hmm. So if your question is a big one and it takes a long time, which we'll probably do one, you will see it use like 60 cloudlets, but then it'll go back down.
It is running at about 3/4 of a gig of RAM right now. Or at least that's what the usage that's what 6 out of 64 is, right?
Yeah, that's almost exactly 100. You're 8 megabytes off only. So yes, that is perfect. Yeah, that's just with it not doing much though. It's just sitting here waiting for stuff. So basically if I click on this URL now, great. So the web application is running. So I do have to like make an account. I think the folks who make this are envisioning that you could run this service for a group of people, basically, and then they could use it. I would not recommend running this for a group of people on Reclaim Cloud. And again, we'll talk about that. But it's just not really going to be optimized for being performant in that way. I'm going to make a password here. I don't actually 100% know. I suspect people watching the stream right now will be able to also make accounts and just use this. I don't actually know. Let me see here. If I open a private window in Firefox, can you go there and make an account? Yeah, you totally can. So I'm just gonna ask the, I don't know, 3 people who are watching this right now, don't, because it's not gonna be a good time. But I can't actually stop you. I'm sure there's a way in the settings to lock that down, but we're not quite there yet. So this is the basic interface. So if I go back to ChatGPT over here, you can see it's very similar looking.
Down to the here's 4 prompts thing.
Yeah, and actually this is kind of interesting because we'll do some speed testing a little bit of like a couple different models and see how well they work. And it's kind of nice to be able to just use one of these baked ones here. But yeah, it's a nice interface, honestly. Like, so it's also got this chat history will be on the left here. So when we ask it questions, the history of that will be here. You can actually make different system prompts, and a system prompt in the LLM world is basically like the instructions that you're giving the model in plain language. So an example for like ChatGPT might be, because it's sort of a general purpose thing, it'll say like, you are a helpful assistant. You try to answer questions courteously, concisely, but thoroughly. Like it's the instructions, the prompt that you're giving the model. But you can actually change that. ChatGPT's like paid subscription lets you make your own. This, you can just do it. So you can make prompts and tell it, the system, like, you're an unhelpful assistant who doesn't really want to be that nice to people. Like, you could totally do that and make like a funny, crabby text bot, you know? But another really good example of clever prompt engineering, I think, is Oblivion University here. And I have to zoom out a little bit. But if y'all haven't seen this, this is that we have a whole reclaim today on it. I'm not going to go all into it, but this is using a prompt that describes what Dr. Oblivion as a character is like, and then asks the AI, the large language model, to answer in such a way as would be like Dr. Oblivion would. So that's an example of a clever prompt engineering thing. So the other thing you can do in here is you can upload documents. So you can give it documents, and it's called embedding, and it can use that as a knowledge base or part of its knowledge base to answer questions. So this could be really interesting. Like you could have it like, you know, you could upload like a book and ask it questions about the book. You know, there's a lot of particularly interesting things you could do with that. I've seen people make tools that are specialized at like, oh, here's a bot that is particularly knowledgeable about our documentation or something, right? You could see how that could be potentially useful for certain circumstances. I will say for us at Reclaim, I've thought about that. I was like, what if it was fed our documentation, but the problem space of the type of support we do is broad enough that I think a large language model would have a hard time being helpful, and it would probably just frustrate people because it doesn't know things about like your account status and DNS, and it can't look that stuff up basically.
Yeah, and one of the first things that we end up doing for troubleshooting a lot of the time is we look at the problem, and if it's not like immediately out of the box, you have described something that you just simply don't know that it's like flip a switch, we have to pull up your account and just sort of walk through, okay, check here, here, and here. Are there any sort of red flags, and go from that. And that's, I mean, you can train someone to walk through their account and look for red flags, but at that point, that's not really something that you'd want a chatbot for. That's still a personal thing. And
yeah, and a lot of people in the chat are echoing that the central AT help pages are frustrating, and help desk chatbots are not useful.
Yeah, I think for a company like us, it would be a very big misunderstanding of why people like our support for us to kind of willy-nilly throw that in. But I honestly, if I'm being completely, you know, imaginative and about it, I actually think there would be an opportunity for something that could help us, like internally, right? Like maybe there's something that could. I haven't seen a tool that does this yet, but like, what if you had something that could smartly parse the question and basically put an internal note for us? It's like, it looks like this person needs help with these things. Their account is current, and the DNS is pointing in the right place. Like that could be a big time saver, right? Because there are certain things as support agents we do basically every time when we get a certain set of questions. But there's a whole bunch of implications to that of like, okay, well, what about when it's wrong? And then that didn't save you time. And does that make our support folks answer in a way that's less helpful because they thought they had this good information, right? Like it's complicated. It's really complicated.
Yeah, and I think also if it's giving you, I think the first time that it gives you information that ends up not being true, you immediately go, well, I have to double check this until the end of time, basically.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, and then
in
it's
that
not
case, why
useful.
have a bot?
Exactly. So, all right. So let's kick her off here. We have the web interface working, but right now we can't ask it any questions. There's no models set up. So if I put in here like, hello, it's just going to say no model selected. So I need to go to the settings, and I'm going to go to models, and it's going to say, hey, you can pull a model from ollama.com. To access the available model name for downloading, click here. So Ollama is it's another tool, a separate tool actually, that this Open WebUI is sort of built on top of. But this thing is designed for running large language models that are openly available to run on your local computer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time demoing this, but I do have it also installed on my Mac. And I will say, if you're curious about open large language models in a general sense, this could be another thing you want to check out is Ollama. But basically, it's a command line tool. So you run it, and you can download a model. So if I run here, and actually I need a model name, so we're going to use Phi3 here in a little bit. So
I saw the word wizard and I got really excited, but that's not what that does, I'm sure.
There are absolutely large language models that are designed to be DM companions.
Okay,
so
fantastic.
That is 100% a thing. I don't think this one is, but yeah, there are some. So I can pull Phi3, and I'm going to do that, and it's 2 gigs, so it'll take my internet connection about.
While it's loading, I just want to say that the Ollama name is fun, and also, it's cute. You can immediately get your mascot to be a little llama. But I'm also thinking, it's a fun little, I guess, stealth pun of OLL Ask Me Anything. OLLAMA.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I know the name comes from Llama 3 or Llama, which is the family of LLMs that Meta puts out that are open for anyone to use. I don't actually know what Llama stands for off the top of my head, and Ollama, I don't know. I guess Open Llama. It's definitely a play on that. So
yeah, it's not. I'm overcomplicating it, maybe, but it killed time.
It could be. I wouldn't be surprised though if the AMA in Llama has something to do with that, right?
It's large language model meta AI.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
But you could see like they put LA in language in that. It's a little bit of a backronym, it sounds like, So all right, so then once you've pulled a model, I can run it. So you do Ollama run Phi3. There's a reason I'm doing Phi3, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But you can do any of these from the list. And this is running on my Mac. My Mac is actually an M1 Pro. It has like a halfway decent GPU for a laptop. Plus, MacBooks have a neural processing unit, which is actually designed for AI stuff. So it actually can do some simple things pretty well. But I can go in here and, hello, how can I assist you today? It's pretty quick for Phi3 especially. My favorite prompt for this, especially when I first started playing this, the like how often do you think about the Roman Empire meme was very new when I first started looking at this stuff, and the first suggestion is tell me a fun fact about the Roman Empire. So that's become my thing. Tell me a fun fact about the Roman Empire.
We have a note in the chat of, is it possible to show the resource usage on
Oh yeah, good point.
your oh, hey,
I can actually.
Taylor's
Now,
got tools for everything.
yes, that's a very good point, though. So first of all, there's a ton going on my laptop, like because I'm doing streaming and stuff. So, the interesting thing here is I actually have not been able to find where this uses resources. The tool I use has CPU, memory, and it's not particularly memory intensive, although it's using some. So you can see 932, about a gig. But if I go in the activity monitor, I think I may be able to. The problem is this is mostly hitting my GPU, and I don't have a great way to show GPU
To track
usage
G-
on
yeah.
the laptop.
Because that's
But let me ask it the same question again here and see if we can see any numbers go up. The answer is kind of no. So that would be good. There definitely are ways to look at GPU usage on a Mac. It's not something I'm set up for because I have those tools on my PC because I play games on my PC, and I don't actually know what those are on the on Mac OS. I'd have to look at that. But my point is, and it's still illustrative of my point, it's actually not really hitting my CPU much. It's mostly using a GPU, which I don't have visualized here, basically. But it's pretty fast. This library or this model we're using is called Phi3 Mini. So the other thing is there are tons of these, and they're all, or most of them, are sort of derivatives of a few. So Llama is the meta one. They put it out. They just put out Llama 3 like a couple weeks ago, I think, for the first time. This has been updated 2 days ago, but this is their latest one, basically. And it's quite good. There's a company called Mistral that has their own thing, and Mistral is very popular. And then there's Gemma, which is something that Google puts out that's kind of related to their. Google has like 5 horses in the AI game in classic Google fashion. I'm sure they'll kill 4.5 of them by the end of next year. But anyway, and then a lot of these other ones are actually sort of customizations of one of the base ones, like Llama 3 or is the updated version of Llama 3. That's what Phi 3 is based on. I only know this from looking at it a little bit earlier, but basically Phi 3 is Microsoft's take on Llama 3. So it's interesting looking at this because there's a lot of news and like tech journalism around like, oh yeah, so you've got Google and they've got their proprietary thing, and you've got Microsoft and they are heavily invested in OpenAI, and then Facebook's Meta's got their open thing, and those 3 are fighting. It's like, yeah, but also Microsoft has open versions of all of the things, and so does Google, and Facebook has customization. Like it is a wild world out there, and every large company is investigating in every direction, as far as I can tell. So we just asked a question of Phi 3. We're going to do the same thing, though, not on my Mac, now on Reclaim Cloud. So what I need to do is I just need to copy this name, Phi 3, literally, and I can go to the settings and models, and then I literally just type in the name of the model and hit download, and it will grab it. And it, it'll take it a sec too. It'll be a little bit faster because the network bandwidth it has is faster than what my home computer will have, because this is all running.
Let's see if it changed the cloud lights.
Ooh, good point.
So far, no. And that's just because right now it's basically just downloading a file. But one of the reasons I shared my screen this way, and I'm going to clean up some tabs here, is because I want to actually show these things side by side when we do use it. So I have a model installed.
I think it already got Phi 3.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I just need to select it then. And now I can have it tell me a fun fact about the Roman Empire. Now, Phi 3 is actually a large-ish model in the scope of these. So this might not work. We're going to see. But I have some other things we'll try if it doesn't work. So we're going to have it do our sample question here. On the right side, like I said, you'll be able to see the CPU usage and memory usage in general sense. So, oh, okay. That's working really well, actually. I must have done something wrong last time, or maybe I used, when I was playing around with this, I might have used a different model before. But you can see it lit up most of the CPU, all of the CPU cores at certain points. It only did it though during the questions asking, right? So as soon as that was done, or sorry, questions answering, as soon as that was done, it's back to basically idle. And that was long enough to slightly increase the cloudlet usage because it's using more RAM now. And that's probably because it has the model loaded, basically. The model is now in memory. But it actually wasn't long enough to have significant cloudlet usage over time. So this is a good one. Now, there are certain tasks that CPU usage, basically. So if I go here, I'm going to open the sidebar. Yeah, okay. So over here, we've got the little history. I'm going to make a new chat, actually. And if I have it do like a coding task, I've found it will often take a lot longer in certain cases. So it says, show me a code snippet of a website sticky header. I don't 100% actually know. Okay, so like a sticky, like the
If
menu
you
bar
scroll,
at the
it's
top.
going to
Yeah, it
stick to the
stays.
top.
That's what it means. Okay, so let's have it generate that. Oop, I have to. Usually it remembers the last model.
You can say set as default.
Oh, okay. I'll have to do that. So this is a little bit longer. This is just like more text. So it's
and you can see it lighting
longer.
up on like 4 or 5 minimum across the.
It's using pretty much every core except for at any given time 1 or 2, but it's relatively evenly distributed here. So in this case, it's generating HTML and a whole bunch of CSS for us to use and explaining the JavaScript and generating the JavaScript.
There's some notes in the chat. Eric's mentioned that inference is way less resource intensive than training.
Yes.
But Tom's talking about what does fine tuning do?
So inference is asking basically what we're doing now, asking a question. That's what getting at what I was talking about before, where training is creating the model, and that is a very resources intensive process that companies have to do once, basically, to make the model. Now, they aren't doing that once. They're doing it once, and then they're doing it again for the better version, right? Every twice a year or once a year or whatever. So it's an ongoing process, but my point is, once a model is created, you don't have to retrain it unless you need to change how it works significantly.
As a note, we spiked up to 30 cloudlets, which is almost 4 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
It's going back down now, but
most of that was probably not RAM related though, and was probably CPU usage related.
Right. I always think of it in terms of RAM because it's easy to go in steps of 8. Much harder to do in terms of CPU. But
yeah, and it's important to note that those are linked in the cloudlet model, right? So it's either one, so basically that you will get charged for. But the cool thing about CPU usage on Reclaim Cloud is that you get this big CPU to use, and then as soon as your task is over, it doesn't cost you as much anymore. So for something like this, for small models, this could be a relatively interesting way to do it. We're going to talk about the limits of it though, because there definitely are. So even this here, you can see that this is not bad, but this is not exactly a fast response. If I did this type of thing on ChatGPT, and this is using whatever their free model is, 3.5. I don't have the subscription for the paid one. It'll probably do this a little bit faster. It's
a little
faster, but it's
faster.
actually not as big of a difference as I would have thought. And now I'm curious to try Ollama. So let me actually
And you can run these in parallel because one of them is running on your machine and the other ones are running on ChatGPT.
So
machine.
Ollama is fast.
That's yeah.
It's cool. It's interesting to me that it also outputs Markdown, but it's in a terminal, so it's just got like the backticks and everything. But you can see here though that they answered very differently. So Ollama basically just did one HTML. Yeah, it's sort of one HTML thing with some embedded inline JavaScript and inline CSS, and that is not what Phi3 and ChatGPT did. They all did separate files. That's not necessarily like a good or bad thing. It's just different. And I should mention too, I forgot, this is Phi3. These two are the same model, right? But these systems, they're not determinate, right? So they will answer differently in different circumstances. So there's a lot there that can affect that kind of thing. So that's one model here. We're going to load up a couple others too. So I'm going to go to the settings again, go to models. And in my notes, I had marked down to try a few other ones. Tiny Llama, which, as you can probably expect, is very small. And it's very fast. It's not very good, though. It's like significantly less verbose, which isn't always necessarily a problem, but it's real bad at coding from my testing. And we're going to use one called Zephyr. And so if I go back to the Ollama page here and go to their models page, Zephyr is one of them. And I think there's a bunch of different versions of it. But this is a fine-tuned version of Mistral. Which is, I mentioned before, Mistral is another company in the space. They make a few different open models. They're, I think not, I believe they're a startup. So they're not owned by any of the big companies, but they have a lot of investment from, many different places, basically. But it is a fine-tuned version. So this is kind of getting at what Tom was talking about with fine-tuning. So I can tell you from experience that Mistral does not work on Reclaim Cloud in a meaningful way. It is so slow as to be unusable. But Zephyr is a fine-tuned one, which means it's smaller. It's easier to run, and it works okay in a CPU environment, which is what we're using, right? We don't have GPU resources on Reclaim Cloud. And so certain types of models just aren't the largest, most complicated ones, aren't going to work very well. Zephyr is one I've tried before, and it seems to work pretty well. So if I go in here, yeah, I already got those three. So these are three I've tried. Phi3 is another one that has worked pretty well. You can actually see here how large the models are on the disk.
I was going to say.
And these are generally, in a very loose sense, a good indication of how well they'll work for in my testing. I'm also going to grab Llama.
In terms of quality of results or in terms of speed and resource
usage? In terms
usage?
of speed.
Yeah.
So I'm also going to grab Llama 3, which is much larger. And that is, again, the newest one from Meta. And probably Llama 3 is the closest competitor to, in the open LLM space, to like GPT-4, which is currently OpenAI's best public general use model. So, which is not free. You have to subscribe for that one, but that is the closest competitor in the open space, as far as I know. And again, like I said, there's tons of derivations of this. If you go looking, like if you Google, like what is the best open LLM for this, you'll find like endless pages on like Reddit and like forums of people being like, well, I like this for this, and it's a very fast evolving space, and there are a lot of subjective things about it, right? Because these things don't always provide the same response. No one can say, oh, this is, in my opinion, no one can say this thing is definitely better for this one task, there are some measurements that the industry uses, but they are the measurements that people use to compare these things are themselves not that useful for someone like me who's just like, which one should I use? They're a little bit more interesting for like the people working on the models. So let's do another. Oh, I don't. Can I just
You can
ask
run it on.
two? Oh, okay. We're gonna try that later, but we'll do that now. We're gonna do Tiny Llama and we'll do another Phi 3, which both of them seem to be pretty quick. So let's do like overcome procrastination tips. Yeah, let's do that. I don't know if is it going to ask the same. Yeah, it totally is. So you can toggle back and forth here. So you can see Tiny Llama here is like going for it. It's already halfway done.
And they're working in parallel right now.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, Tom says going to huggingface.com/co/models, which is another repository for these models. Is like walking into a giant supermarket in a foreign country where you only took the 101 language course. Yeah, this I spent some time here and I don't know what I'm looking at 98% of the time. This is why I found Ollama refreshing, even if you're going to just use it on a Mac or your PC locally. Going here, just downloading the software, it works in the terminal. It's not too hard to set up. They have some good instructions, and then just going to this model page and just trying things has been the best path for me to learn about this stuff personally.
They give you that little 1-2 sentence primer as opposed to
have something to start from, right? And say, okay, well, that sounds good. Let me learn more about that, right? Like that is very helpful.
Linking to a GitHub is well and good for people who know what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't even know what is Zephyr? Like it's helpful to have even this much information to start from. All right, so Tiny Llama's done, and wow, Tiny Llama wrote a lot. That's cool. All right, and then Phi 3 wrote actually less, but it may be better. You know, more is not necessarily better, especially with large language models in my experience.
Tiny Llama subscribes to the like, if you do a lot of it, but it's low quality,
it's loquacious.
It's like, a specific type of procrastination. Is instead of taking the time to revise and make sure, you just sort of keep saying words until people go, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and even like the difference in formatting too. Mm-hmm. Like
that's
Phi 3 had like bolded headers, and Tiny Llama just put it all in one.
Yeah, I'm curious. I wonder if Tiny Llama is less capable of that, or if this is just one example where it did a worse job at it. I don't actually know. But I will say I found Tiny Llama to be really fast, and for basic things, like that's interesting, but it's not very good at, like I said, like it's not very good at programming tasks. So I guess we could do the code snippet of a website's header thing again. This might be a simple enough task that it's possible it will do fine, honestly. But I will say it is interesting here. So in this case here, it just put a header and it was like, okay, here's where you'd write your header. Whereas the other examples we use, it actually made sample headers that you could customize. Yeah. So that is one thing I could point to.
And I'm looking at this at the CSS. If I'm not much mistaken, that's just going to get you. What is that going to get you?
I don't know. I think this might work. Position fixed. It's at the top of the screen, 100% width. I am not an expert enough at this to look at the CSS.
CSS especially
what it would exactly do and what would the problem be.
Yeah.
I think it might work. So, but you can see here. Here's Phi 3. It actually gave us an entire like header to customize, basically.
And it included links to what the other. Like, it named them script.js and style.css, which is good programming practice, but it also includes like, I'm going to give you 2 other documents. Here's how you would make sure they're all hooked up.
But you could see how this is not in any way an objective thing, right? So like Tiny Llama, I think, did the job, right? Like it's not that it did it wrong, right? But it might be that you're looking for more background information or a more fleshed out example, or maybe you're not, right? So that's where I think this space is interesting, is these things are so different in how they may answer a question.
Tom's confirmed that the CSS should be totally fine. So.
Okay, so that's cool. So that's kind of in some way a win for Tiny Llama, right? It made something that work. It's maybe more minimally viable potentially. Like it's possible that the other example would be more useful if you came in not knowing anything about this or very little, right? And saying, "Oh, cool, it made a home and about and contact. I'll just edit those to be what I want," you know. But maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you want a minimal thing. So finally here, we're going to make one more new chat. And we are going to select Llama 3, which is an 8 billion parameter model, which is a measure of sort of its size. So I also will mention here, if I go into the settings again and go to this screen here. So Llama 3 is about 4.3 gigabytes. So it's actually, and we haven't tried Zephyr yet. So this may actually work okay. I wonder, so I was doing some prep this morning and certain things were going slower than I thought. And I think I maybe forgot to give it more resources. So that would be my fault. But we are going to do my, we are going to do my favorite, you know, tell me a fun fact about the Roman Empire test. That's my benchmark for these things. And I will say there is some like speed implications when it seems like when you switch models, it can take it a little bit to do that. So you can notice here, this is a lot slower in terms of the speed that it can generate the text.
Yeah. I will note that speed is relative. That's still, you know, for what it's doing, this is still fast.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, theoretically, Llama 3 being a more sophisticated model, it may be, this is probably not a great example of its capabilities, but it may be that it has a higher quality result, and that's great. I have found in what I've used them that the coolest thing about these is that you can ask follow-up questions and refine what it's told you. So you can go back to something like Tiny Llama and say like, this is good, but how would I make 3 links in a menu bar inside of the HTML? And let's try that.
Also, I appreciate the disclaimer at the bottom. LLMs can make mistakes. Verify important information.
Yeah. In a menu for home, about, and contact.
Let that. Oh.
So it says it's going to do this with CSS and JavaScript, which that's weird.
I
would think you would want to do that in the HTML.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Had 3 links in a menu. So I think it's written some. Okay, it's written some JavaScript which would make like a rollover menu. So I don't think this is the best. Yeah. So my point is though is that, and again, Tiny Llama is very less capable, much less capable than some of the other ones. But my point is, that's where the speed comes into it though, is because when it's fast to answer, you can clarify, right, and say, that's not quite what I wanted. I want you to do that, but add this and subtract that. So that's where the speed can really come into it. And I will say though, I'm kind of impressed actually that even Llama 3 seems to work pretty well with this thing. I think the key difference I'm realizing here, and if anyone wants to run this on Reclaim Cloud, I'd recommend set your environment topology in that, give it more resources like this. Do that before, I've got this too small to see. Do that before starting up the application, because I think that made a difference as to how much resources it decided to use. Now, if you were to do it after, all you'd really need to do is just stop the environment and start it again. But I would recommend that, because this morning when I was doing some prep to make sure this was all going to work for today, I found that Llama 3, I couldn't get to really answer a question. So this is significantly better than it was for me. Now, there are some truly large models though that would not work, and we're out of time. So I think we're gonna call it here though. But I'm gonna put in Mixtral, which is a very large one, wow, okay, never mind. It's gonna take too long to download. But I'll just say, in my experience, if you have a model that doesn't work well without a GPU, what you'll see is it will be so slow as to basically lock up this application. In some cases, I even had to just refresh my web page so it would try to stop answering, basically, to get it to come back. So that's kind of touching on sort of the limits here. Is when you get into the larger models in terms of more parameters, and even just the size of the download will also be typically scales as well, although that's not, the size of the download isn't the problem, but it's indicative of how large a model is. That's where you really run into the limits. So, if people want to try this on Reclaim Cloud, I would totally recommend using Open WebUI like I did. I actually am really curious to try maybe it with like Phi 3, which to me seems like a good mixture of speed, but is pretty good at answering questions, and seeing what I can do with it as an API, because this also, you can set it up as an API endpoint. So you could do something like, say, like Oblivion University, right? Where that is sending your query as an API request out to OpenAI. And what if we hosted that on Reclaim Cloud? Could it be good? I don't know, right? So that's kind of my next thing I want to do with it, is setting up Reclaim Cloud as an API service for some of these things. But I don't have a good sense of how many requests could it handle at once. We're doing one right now. So that kind of stuff I'd be really curious about.
Well, thank you for thank you for this, Taylor. I now feel like I know more about a field that just got a lot larger. So percentage-wise, it might even out.
That's where I'm at with this stuff too. Mm-hmm. The more I learn, the more I know that I don't know much.
Yeah.
So, but it is an interesting thing, an interesting challenge for me to wrap my head around, and I'm very excited to see. I'm pretty bearish on a lot of this stuff in general, but I do think we're getting to a place where we're starting to see some of the hype cool around it. And for me as a technologist, that's exciting, because we're going to get to a point where a lot of the money crashes, right? And it's like, all right, well, this isn't happening. This is disappointing. And I think from that usually rises some good and like clear-eyed use cases, and typically good open or free or at least inexpensive ways to do this stuff. And I think we're on that trajectory. I don't know, timelines, whatever, but like I really do think that that's going to be interesting. And I'm as sick of hearing about AI being integrated into every single tool and product as the next person. But I do think we're almost in that next stage of like, okay, we kind of know what these things are good at and what they're not good at. I think we're getting there. So
totally.
We are over time, and thanks Meredith and Pilot for joining me while I rambled about what I almost know about.
And I know.
Helping me explore this stuff. So
cool. And thanks everybody in the chat for tuning in.
Yeah. Good to see y'all.
See y'all next time.
Bye.